Did we figure anything out?
I really don't think so. I really should have brought more. I'm surprised. Like this is an atrophied muscle. Like I thought I still had it, but I don't have any of the venom I thought I had.
Uh,
It's all gone. I put it so far. It's in so many layers down in the filing cabinet. I don't even remember what
uh,
I used to yell about anymore. I
yeah.
am fascinated. Like I was fascinated to hear everything that you said, and I think you might be surprised at how generous people are about it. But I also completely understand if you're just like, you know what, fucking no, absolutely not, absolutely
Yeah,
not.
it's gonna take some. It's gonna take some editing. All right, so three-tiered evaluation. Probably this is like still up in the air as to value of the content. As to the questions asked and answered, very unclear. But as to, yeah, I feel kind of like we did like an excruciating like naked finish sauna together, and we both feel like real weird and bashful about it. But it's like, all right, we did it. It's fine. Hate the fucking
That's ex-
fins. Hate that lady with the fucking birch branches, but
that's
fine.
exactly how.
Like we did it.
That's so
It's
perfect.
done. Yeah.
That's so perfect.
I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to all of you who have taken a moment sometime this week to recommend the show to a friend. Please do that if you have the chance, whether that's somebody online or in person, by post or by smoke signal, carrier pigeon. Let somebody know you think this is a podcast that he or she might enjoy listening to, or not he or she, they, any combination, any version, any kind of person, all are welcome. And then you're how people hear about the show. You're it. So thank you for passing the word along. Thanks also to everyone who subscribes to The Secret Show. If you would like to get 3 extra episodes of SLEERICKETS a month, along with some 50 odd episodes already up there, including a lot that are, I think, pretty beloved or hated by listeners in varying proportions. Go to sleeverickets.substack.com, put in your email address, and I'll give you a week's access for free. It's pretty cheap after that, so give it a thought, or at least see what the deal is. Along those lines, I have, in the most recent episode, I returned for the very end of the episode, for the last 20 or so minutes, to a topic that has come up a few times previously, that the question of the new Criterion and the politics of its editor and publisher, Roger Kimball, and the role that poets play or don't play in all of that. I did have some new thoughts. No radical change. Like, I still think Roger Kimball is a racist. I mean, maybe I think he's more of a racist than I thought before. I think I still say fuck Roger Kimball, and I still am not writing off anybody who has worked there. I mean, well, let me put it this way. I'm not writing anybody off for having had an association with the new Criterion merely. And I have nothing but warm feelings toward plenty of people I know who have varying degrees of association with them. I did have a couple new thoughts. If that is something that interests you, you can go to The Secret Show, and I went ahead and made the free preview for this most recent episode, that whole section. So if you want to hear if you want to hear the update on the new Criterion, that is the free preview for this past most recent episode. So it's episode 53, I believe, and the title is Why Poems Are No Fun. So if you go to that, you go to the free preview online, it's all about the new Criterion. So if that's what you want, you can find it there. If not, It's easy to avoid, and I put it at the end of the episode in case anybody who already subscribes to The Secret Show is sick and tired of that. You can just stop there, and then you won't miss any of the rest of it. All of the rest of the episode is actually about poetry. So this week's episode, had I not already used the episode title "The Rabbit Hole" for the reams of hate mail inspiring episode that I did with Brian about atheism and Christianity years ago at this point, or year and change ago. If I hadn't already used the episode title for that, I would use it for today's episode. Partly because it's not just about one thing. It is a two-parter. The first half is a little under an hour, and it is largely about... This is definitely an intractable problems episode. Just know that. It's not really about poetry. It is in part about art and morality in art, public morality in and outside of art. It's the first part to the main feed. Today's episode is largely about abortion, and specifically about a movie all about abortion called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Alice runs the show for most of this one. So it is in an odd way an interview of me, which if you think that sounds inappropriate for an episode about abortion, you're not wrong. We recorded this before I went on vacation in July. And a few things have happened since then that are relevant to the question. One is, I should say, the first part's about abortion. The second part is longer and juicier and will only be on The Secret Show at Alice's specific request. It is about men and women in slightly broader terms, as well as in a weird way about success in Australia versus success in America versus success for a man or for a woman. I did not know where any of this was going to go, and it went to some strange places. And the one rule I really imposed on myself was almost 100% of what we talked about was stuff that, under normal circumstances, in polite, thoughtful, well-considered, civilized conversations, I would absolutely keep my mouth shut and just let other people do the talking. The one rule I imposed was that I wasn't allowed to do that. So we get into a few things, and the cold open, in case you didn't figure it out yet, is basically the very end of what we had to say to each other after we had gone through all of it, the whole 2.5 hour conversation. We were very tired, but it was something. I hope you will enjoy it. Given that the audience of this podcast is a mix of Aussies, Brits, Americans, the poets and non-poets, Christians and atheists, given the great variety of people who listen to this podcast, my prediction that I feel pretty confident about is that roughly half of you will agree with Alice, and roughly 100% of you will disagree with me. So I apologize in advance. As I say several times during the recording, I don't feel perfectly confident about anything I say in here, though I did try to speak frankly and honestly and thoughtfully. And then since then, I've continued to think about all these things. Also, Alice and Brian released their episode about masculinity. I thought it was a wonderful conversation. I'm really glad it, as I told them, if SLEERICKETS ever wins a Peabody, it'll be for that episode. I disagree with almost everything they have to say in that episode, but my voice wasn't in it, and that's fine. That's okay. There's a lot we don't cover. There are a lot of questions left unanswered, but we did try to talk about some things that are hard to talk about. I also got since our conversation, the episode I recorded with Derek Mong came out. I got some responses to that, mostly sort of off the record responses. And in addition to all of this, Alice put out a really good 2-part episode about a poem written in the voice of Aeneas by a female Australian poet. And it's a 2-part episode. It's a Poetry Says. It's all about this one poem. And she invited me to contribute some to it. A number of other people contributed to it. It is an odd... I think she did a wonderful job editing it. I mean, she really composed it beautifully in the way that she does. That it's something beyond what I do here. But it is interesting to listen to because you hear a lot of female voices and a lot of male voices. The male voices almost uniformly take up the cause of Dido, and the female voices almost uniformly come to Aeneas' defense. So I strongly recommend that. In response to my little contribution to that episode, I got a wonderful note from Zara. I think she had more sympathy for Dido and less for Aeneas, maybe than some of than the majority of the female contributors to the episode. I won't read her whole note. It is very thoughtful, and she talks about the Dorothy Porter poem in particular, as well as sort of questions of how we view men and women and differences in gender roles over time. I'll just read the end of her note, which, again, I think it's all very thoughtful. It is largely about this particular episode, which I do recommend to you as yet another opportunity to worry about men and women. Zara closes by saying, "Why is Aeneas not seen as a hero? Why does our heart, Alice is accepted, instinctively go out to Dido as yours did?" She's speaking to me here. I think Alice's heart also goes out to Dido, but she maybe had a little more sympathy for Aeneas than either Zara or I did. Zara goes on, because she being Dido, was a fully active partner in the relationship between her and Aeneas, because she sought reciprocity. I, too, am moved, Matthew, by your rendering of Aeneas embracing the specter of his dead wife, but in this scene he reminds me of Proust and the Madeleine, too, in savoring with sorrow the scent of her. He seems for the most part a busy man of affairs. I picture him in suit and tie. He is crude in his rejection of Dido, a middle manager who has served her purpose. Where is his remorse for not once turning to check on her? For surely his wife is due some. He also, as he was fleeing Troy, his wife ran behind him, Aeneas is his first wife. And she is lost during that exodus, and he never turns back to see her, so he doesn't realize she's lost until he's already out of the city and she's dead. I very, very much recommend that episode of Alice's Show. I'll include a link in the show notes, and you can hear Zara make a little contribution to it, as well as Ethan, and I think Elijah may be in there also. A bunch of people are in there. I got another note from an old friend, John, probably my oldest friend. I think that's correct, my oldest friend. He wrote in response to... John has remained, quietly one of the most thoughtful correspondents for any of the work that anytime I write something, John reads it so thoughtfully, it sort of catches me off guard. And he wrote in response to the couple of episodes about Bloodchild, both my conversation with Brian about it and about Octavia Butler's note that it is not about slavery, it is about male pregnancy, and then my dad's response that Butler was right and Brian and I were wrong. John writes he says something I think very similar to what Coleman said on the Substack chat, but John used a little bit more detail. So he says, my reading of Bloodchild is that the author is of course literally right that the story is about what if men could get pregnant, right? That is what happens in the story, effectively. All right. John says, what makes it what it is that she doesn't investigate that idea in a 21st century liberal elite scenario where now men and women have true equity and utopia is achieved, or an individualistic lens of the inner life of a man as we are, who somehow finds himself pregnant. Rather, she creates a world in which men carry the young of society as women have in many places on earth for many thousands of years, as submissive subjects of the men of the species in a condition akin to chattel slavery. And yet, she presents it with the true-to-life complexity of that condition, symbiosis between men and women, and at times romantic or at least familial love, which at any moment can turn violent at the woman's expense. And he goes on to say that this subjugation and complex emotional set of ties is very parallel in certain ways to the situation of black men and women who were kept in chattel slavery in America. And so that is, it is not so strange that is something else that comes to mind. But his claim is that it is chiefly about pregnancy. I tend to think he's pretty right, and I was thinking, I talked to my dad a little bit about why I responded to her note the way I did, and I think it was in part her saying that it's about male pregnancy, where I think if she had said it's about pregnancy, I probably would have been less resistant to that, because I think it probably is more about pregnancy, period, than it is about specifically male pregnancy. And I think even more than any of that, what I responded to was her insistence on aboutness. That I think saying it is not about this, it is about that, is really part of what set me off, because I tend not to think of stories and poems in quite that way, that they are technically about something else. I've just read an essay by Susan Sontag. Stephen Sondheim. Susan Sontag wrote the essay. It's called Against Interpretation. Haley Lighthouser recommended it. I'm going to be having her on soon. But she basically says, stop saying books are about something other than what they say they are about. And I think I am sympathetic to that protestation. So, but I think John is pretty perceptive there, as Coleman was in making a slightly more casual remark to a similar effect. Finally, I went on an annual trip. I go on. My brother was able to come this year. A couple of good friends were. We went up to the mountains and hung out. The boys and I, and a couple of the ladies too. A couple of my friends' wives / significant others came up, and I asked a question Alice and I have talked about a few times, which is, what is masculinity? And I got a couple of interesting responses. One from the guys was more or less, a real man is someone who doesn't worry about what masculinity is, but just stops complaining, keeps his head down, does his work, suffers in silence and pushes through and gets things done that need to get done without worrying about what it's called. And I sort of jokingly reframed this as, so if a young man came to you and said, so what does masculinity mean? Your answer would be, shut up, pussy. And I think, and like the response was like, basically, yeah, like sort of, jokingly with some understanding with some self-mocking irony and understanding, like basically, yes, that is the answer. The other response I got was from one of the women up there, and she said something sort of along the lines of what Alice says during our conversation, which is, well, men have power women don't have. And so what men should do, so sort of a task that is unique to men, or uniquely available to men, is the task of using your power to help women. I do talk with Alice a lot about exactly what that power is and who possesses it. But I thought I would offer those additional answers to this endlessly thorny question. All right, now here is Alice, and here am I, and God help us. I may let you be in charge if that's okay with you.
I would love that. I have heaps
Yeah,
of questions for you.
good.
Um,
And we can
yeah.
do talk in whatever order or unofficially or officially, however you'd like. I'm kind of shot. So,
Yeah, that's fine. That's
yeah,
really
glad,
fine.
very glad to be talking to you, but I have, my organizational capacity is limited at the moment.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. Yeah. The other thing to say too is like, I feel like, first of all, there's not many guys who'd be up for having this conversation with me, and I'm really excited and appreciative.
Yeah, yeah,
But
of course.
also, I'm aware that we might end up going into territory where we profoundly disagree.
Sure. Yeah,
So, just to say at the outset, I love you and it's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I love you too. And I don't feel I whatever my thoughts and feelings, it's not as if I have a I have a sense of absolute certainty. So I won't, however we might disagree, it probably won't be that I feel certain that you're wrong. I'll probably feel like, oh, I don't know, could be.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, do
I
you
can
want
tell you.
to?
Sorry, I was
No,
gonna
you
tell
go.
you. I went to an extremely progressive high school in Atlanta, which was very unusual for Atlanta. And I think like today in 2023, a lot of the schools around here, with the Chapel Hill area, which is very progressive, as well, would probably have some of the similar programming to what my school did. But this was Atlanta in 1997.
Yeah, right.
Um, and so it was a lot of stuff that was definitely not anywhere near mainstream discourse at the time. I
Hmm.
had come from an extremely conservative Catholic school where I'd gone for 9 years up until then. My my first week at Paideia, the progressive school, I joined the school newspaper, and uh, the the editor, who's a teacher sponsor, sort of wanted to say, "Hey, do whatever you want with this," and I was eager to write stuff, and so uh, he said, "Anyone want to write an editorial?" I said, "Sure, I'll write something." Uh,
Week two.
yeah, very beginning, very just fresh off the like for freshman year, right at the beginning, and so he allowed me to write and publish in the school newspaper a an extremely strident uh, pro-life essay that I think the title, if I recall, was "Abortion: A Sin of Convenience." And so that was my introduction to a very, very progressive school full of women who, from that point on, hated me. Um, I can't say that like my thoughts didn't change over time, but it was definitely like it was a baptism by fire, right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, that was kind
Which is
of.
also another way of saying like I'm used to being yelled at about this, so it's fine. Yeah.
Well, I've retired from yelling, but what was your immediate family practicing? Were they practicing Catholics as well?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. The both sides of my family. I come from sort of two large Irish Catholic families. In this case, both of them lived in Atlanta, and a lot of my aunts and uncles lived in it. Like it was a very large brood, and at least the Smiths and the Haverdys had been in Atlanta for, I mean, since before the Civil War, and so yeah, I mean, and had been Catholic since, I mean, forever. So it was pretty deep Catholic roots
Hmm.
in the city. And I mean, that was really like my school, my Sunday school, my church, my social, like everybody, there were people I knew through like my dad knew from work and from their grad school. We would occasionally float into our lives, but effectively for, until I was 14, everybody I knew was Catholic.
And what
Um,
is the Catholic position on abortion?
it's murder.
Okay. even for the health of the mother.
Well, I mean, I think in fairness to the Catholic view, the health of the mother is a serious concern. But like, if killing a fetus is murder, then like killing a fetus because of the mother's health, like that doesn't make it not killing a human life, right? Like that doesn't really change things for the fetus. It might change things for the society in which the mother lives, which is sort of where I now look at it today,
Mm.
the way I look at it today. But I think like in a way, it's to me those exceptions to like rape and incest and life of the mother exceptions have always been a little funny because though they're clearly carved out for like to show compassion and understanding to the women or girls sometimes, whose lives are put under this sort of terrible strain. It doesn't really affect like what's happening to the fetus, right? Like, so if that's our concern, like if our concern is that there's a human life here, then like the condition of the mother doesn't necessarily change that, right? Does that make sense? Again,
Yeah, no,
this
it
is
makes
not really
sense.
how I tend to think of it today, but I do think that there's a kind of there's an odd consistency to Catholics in saying like, well, it's a human life.
I feel like I should back up just for a second
Yeah,
because depending on what you do in the introduction here, people will be very confused as to why their poetry podcast is all of a
yeah,
sudden the women's hour.
yeah,
When you recorded that rabbit hole episode with
yeah,
Brian,
yeah.
I really, really loved that conversation. There was one moment in it where you said, sort of offhand, you were talking about other things, but you said, abortion is a thorny issue.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is.
And, and to my Australian ears, I thought, ah, is it?
Yeah.
And then
I
more
wonder. I would.
recently,
Is there that same tug of war over there?
absolutely not.
Wow. Okay, so you don't have like significant portions of the population who like everybody's just on board with abortion being legal and it not being a huge deal.
When you look at, to prepare for this, I sort of looked at the abortion laws in the various states and territories.
Yeah, yeah.
Legally, yes, that's true. I'm sure that you could find many segments of the population for various reasons who would have opinions on it, but in terms of rights around it, yeah, you're fine.
Mm-hmm. But you also
The
like there's not people don't argue in public about this.
Oh God, no, no,
Okay. Yeah. All right.
don't argue in
I don't
public
mean like
about
at the
really
grocery
anything.
store. I mean like in news programs or whatever.
No, it's
Yeah.
not like, yeah, it's not on. We have a program here called Q&A,
Mm-hmm.
which is where they do that kind of thing, and I doubt that they've spent much time on this. Maybe they haven't watched Q&A for a while. But the other reason that I wanted to bring this up is when the topic of how to approach the new criterion and
Yeah,
publishing
yeah.
in the new criterion came up. We were going back and forth a bit about that on the Substack, and as part of that, you're sort of talking about the broader issue of being friends with people who have profoundly different approaches to
Mm-hmm.
life,
Yeah,
morality,
yeah.
that kind of thing. And you brought up this question of abortion as an example of that. But it sounded like in what you wrote there that, yeah, your opinions have profoundly changed.
Yeah.
So what are your opinions on it now?
So as with many things, I feel like my opinions end up being such that I can confidently anger everyone. So I s- observing a couple pregnancies very very close up. I think I had two very strong impressions. One is that it is not a small deal to be pregnant. It is a colossal deal. It is not just being, oh, a little inconvenienced for 9 months. It's a huge deal. It radically alters your body, sometimes permanently. I mean, certainly, but like in to varyingly permanent degrees and in varying cases. Like different women's bodies react very, very differently to pregnancy. There, it is a major, it's a major physiological event under like the most mild and benign circumstances, and often circumstances are not entirely benign. It is extravagantly painful, and not just in the moment of delivery. It's a huge, huge deal. And so what became very clear to me is that if we're going to have a broadly speaking, an open, liberal, free society in which men and women are, equals as citizens, can participate equally in citizenship, then like women need to have the ability to choose whether or not to be pregnant. Like that just has to be, uh, that has to be available, right? And I think like then maybe there are questions about like, well, exactly how do you slice that and at what point and this and that. But like broadly speaking, like women have to have that control, because it's like they can't, you can't really have a free society where like women can just. I mean, here's the thing about the rape and incest, and life of the mother exceptions, is that to me what they actually speak to uh, is a silent finger wagging at the mother, right? Because what it's saying is like, oh, well, it's not your fault that you got in this mess, and therefore it doesn't. It's sort of like in school when like the teacher makes an error and you get a bad grade, or like when there's some like external event that ends up fucking up your grade, and then you show it to the teacher says like, oh, okay, well, it's not your fault, so I'll fix the grade. Whereas having finished school, I now think like, oh, they should not do that. Like in school, they should say like, oh, some random accident fucked up your grade. That's life, right? Like I think that would be much better education than saying like, oh, it's not your fault, so we'll go back and fix it. And I think like the rape, incest, life of the mother exception is a little bit like, oh, it's not your fault that it's not just you didn't just like get knocked up because you were irresponsible and therefore like you better deal with this problem now. It's like, well, it's not your fault, so we'll wipe the screen clear for you. So I think like however you want to slice like the mechanical particulars, women have to have the ability to choose whether or not to be pregnant if they are going to be free and equal, full citizens in a free liberal society. To me, that was like very, very clear watching two pregnancies very close up. Another thing that was very clear to me is that from very early on, from like alarmingly early on, the thing that is happening with the fetus in the womb is also no small deal. And there is a lot that is awfully human, awfully early. And I think like my thought is, I don't know, I don't feel at all confident saying just because it's only fair for women to be able to choose to be pregnant or not. And that's true. It is only fair for women to be able to choose to be pregnant or not. And I think legally speaking, that should be the case. Like women should have to be free to choose that. Because that is true, because that is fair, that doesn't mean that the moral stakes are then nil. Like I think like there's the legal reality that like women need to have this freedom, period, right? But then there's also this other additional indisputable reality that like something is present there. And like to what extent you can call it, like I do think that there's a lot of like very, very mealy-mouthed equivocation that pro-choice activists get into when they talk about like, oh, well, it's not a life because it's not self-sustaining, or like, oh, it's not really a human life because it doesn't know that we don't know if it can feel like there's, and like conservatives love to play shitty tricks, forcing people to get ultrasounds, arguing about fetal pain, but also just because they're in bad faith very often when they play those tricks doesn't mean there is not some kernel of truth there. And so I think like that's what I mean when I say it's a thorny issue, meaning like legally speaking, I think it's pretty open and shut. Legally speaking, women need to have the freedom to choose to be pregnant, not pregnant, within reason. Like it should somebody who's like waddling around at 9 months, then get an abortion? No, but also like, boy, that doesn't really happen, except like in circumstances when like there's some medical catastrophe. Like that just doesn't really happen much. But setting aside like the extreme cases, I think probably on balance, well, it should be legal and it might be very wrong. Like, I don't know, like I think like cosmically speaking, I don't think there's a God. I don't think anybody's keeping track, but like something is in there. And boy, it seems pretty alive. And boy, it seems pretty human. And boy, pretty quickly, like pretty early on, that seems to be the case. And looking at an ultrasound very early on, it is particularly if you look, if you look at an ultrasound very early on of a baby that you want to have, it is very hard to superimpose on that perception an equally plausible reality in which just as early on you might say, oh, I don't want to have this baby. Like, it would be the same phenomenon happening there. And like, boy, like there's a little head and a little profile and hands and a little brain. And like, you know, so again, I'm not like, if we're talking about, the morning after pill, is that, oh, it's a clump of cells, I'm less interested in the extreme cases than I am in like the possibility, which to me seems like an extremely high probability, like extremely likely possibility that simultaneously there could be like very, very valid moral and ethical objections to abortion, and at the same time, the inevitable legal conclusion is it has to be legal. It has to be available. I think just like both of those things could be true at the same time. And it seems like very few people want to acknowledge that both of those things could be the case. So, as I said, now that I've alienated literally everybody.
So when all this came up, I messaged you and I said, oh, have you ever seen this film called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which came out in 2020?
Not,
Yeah.
but now I have.
Yeah, now you have. Yeah, so it's a 2020 film made by a Brooklyn filmmaker called Eliza Hittman. She's also made a couple of other features, including the absolutely phenomenal Beach Rats, which I would highly recommend. But Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is the story of a girl called Autumn who lives in Pennsylvania. She's 17. She gets pregnant by, the film strongly suggests, kind of like the high school jock, like kind of a bully.
I mean,
and she,
yeah, the high school boys who are the first males we're introduced to are scum. Like, they are horrible. They are truly just despicable.
yeah,
And then what we hear about them later only confirms that impression.
yeah. So she goes to her local family planning clinic where she gets some very questionable care, realizes that she will have to go to New York to get an abortion because she needs parental consent. Her cousin goes with her and they spend a quite harrowing 72 hours not sleeping, just trying to get by and trying to go through this procedure, which, as it turns out, is a lot more involved than Autumn thought it was going to be because she's further along than she realized. Yeah, so thanks for watching this very upsetting film.
Yeah, exhausting movie to watch.
Yeah, yeah. What were
It
your
did remind me a
thoughts?
little bit of the Romanian movie from like 15, 20 years ago now. 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days.
Oh, I haven't seen
It's
that.
similarly about like two women going on a pilgrimage to get an abortion because it's very difficult to get in Romania.
Right. And Hitman was apparently going to originally set this in Ireland because there was a practice of Irish women traveling to England to get this
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
but then she couldn't get the funding, so she set it in her hometown. So, yeah. What were your feelings as you're watching it beyond when will this thing end?
No, I
For the
didn't think.
record, I
Yeah,
love this film and I loved every second of it, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's extraordinarily well made. It is very, very well, very deliberately put together. The acting is excellent, really excellent.
first time role for the lead.
Sydney Flanagan, yeah, playing
Yeah.
Autumn, and again, I don't know the actor's name, but Skylar, who was her cousin friend. I mean, really, the whole cast was pretty great. I mean, the two of them are really the heart of the movie, and then Jasper is a sort of a distant third. but they were great. It's really well shot. The Probably like the only two moments of like almost unalloyed pleasure. It gets pretty alloyed pretty quickly in the first case, but like probably the only two moments of like just pure delight are the moments when you hear Autumn singing. She's a lovely singer. She's a really lovely singer. She's singing at the very beginning, in the middle of her performance. Some guy in the audience yells "slut," and she has to start over. But she's a really, really extraordinary singer. And then later in the movie, she sings again. I mentioned that only because like she's great, and like they did like that was great. They did a great job with that. She was great with that. There's so much that is so well done. I think the dialogue is really, really smartly done. It's very spare. It is very tightly structured. It is it's interesting. I looked at some of the overview of like reviews. It has like a 99 I think when we looked at it, it was like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, some of those are like, oh, I have to give this 5 stars, don't I? Kind of reviews.
Yeah, I mean the thing that surprised me a little bit was that it did seem like there was like a consensus among critics was that like, oh, part of what makes this so great is that it's not at all didactic or polemical. They're like, well, it's very polemical. Like it's very. I think Chris Childers drew like a fine distinction between polemical and so didactic means teaching, and polemical means committing to a. Is it like a negatively oriented rant? Let me look this up to get that because he'll be yelling at me otherwise. So
Stop yelling, Chris. God, you're just yelling
okay,
all
yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
So polemic comes from the Greek word for war, polemos. So yeah, yeah. It's not like it's not polemical in that you don't have people lecturing at you literally, like you don't have people saying, "Here is the thing about abortion." You just have a very, very effective dramatization of what it means when abortion is this difficult to access, what a burden it is, how harrowing this, you know, these. I mean, it is in a way, it's an interesting case study for like, it's not a real case, but like it's an interesting case to take up for making this argument because part of what you're showing is actually like, well, despite all of these obstacles, they actually got it done. But it is really, I mean, it clearly is like, holy shit, so many things could have gone even more wrong. So many things could have been much worse than they were. And it's pretty bad. It's pretty
It's
rough.
pretty bad. It's an it gets worse plot for sure.
Yeah. And Skylar is the best friend known to man. I mean, she's
She's
just
incredible.
such a brick, like such a rock. I found it to be like a very, very effective piece of rhetoric. Like if you want to show somebody that like, hey, it actually is a big deal if your state has these sort of funny little like stingy little restrictions along the way, even like, oh, permission of the parent, oh, this week or that week, oh, that, like, oh, you have to listen to an altar, like these little nitpicky, seemingly minor restrictions are a big deal, and you see how they work as a big deal here. I don't think very many people would watch this and say like, oh, it's good that this is what had to happen. I mean, I think there are plenty of people who would make other kinds of arguments about it, but like, this is not anybody's idea of like, oh, it's good that the system works this way. So I think as a piece of rhetoric, it's very effective. Again, beautifully acted, very skillfully written, wonderfully shot, wonderfully put together. I mean, it's just like it is a really impressive piece of work.
Mm.
As a story about human characters, eh. Like I thought, like they were, Sydney in particular was human. Like she like snaps at her friend, and she like does some dumb teenager stuff, and she is, like limited and human, but also like soft and thoughtful, and all these wonderful, like she has all these qualities, true, but I don't know. Like somebody said, like, oh, it's a portrait of a friendship. I think like, is it? I don't know. Maybe like it's a
I
portrait of
think,
how fucking difficult it is to get an abortion, and
yeah,
how
and I
shit
think,
and like and it's fine because that's because of what the movie's about. But like every man in the movie sucks, like really sucks. Like Jasper sucks the least by being merely like pushy and manipulative and oblivious. Like that's like best case scenario. Everyone else is like absolute scum of the earth.
and Hitman has talked about that in terms of the protagonist is Autumn, But the antagonist, there isn't really an antagonist except for this broader world of men who exist to provide, I think, a constant sense of threat. That's what I feel when I watch it.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But I can well imagine, and Hitman has talked about this as well, just the sheer uncomfortableness of watching this as a man. And maybe even a feeling of like that's not a fair portrait.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think it made me uncomfortable. I just think it wasn't a very good story. Like it didn't. I mean, let me put it this way: like I've seen plenty of movies where like women act like cartoon characters with breasts. Like like I've seen plenty of movies like women where women are not acting like real human beings, and that doesn't make me feel comfortable. Like it doesn't make like I don't feel more at ease. And like you take a movie like Punch Drunk Love, like the Seven Sisters in Punch Drunk Love. Those are mere horrible antagonists. Like they're just there to henpeck Adam Sandler, and like that's fine as like a bit of stage scenery while the actual story is happening between him and Emily Morton, I think. I guess I just like to me this was a story about a person coming up against a bureaucratic system and struggling and doing everything, like with the help of her friend, getting what she wants out of it, and God bless her. But I didn't leave the story like I left the story thinking like, oh, I never want my daughter's to have to go through that. Like Joanna has to pee a lot during movies, so like she stopped the movie a bunch of times. I went up and like kissed my younger daughter and like went to my older daughter's room where she was reading, and I said like, oh, I just want you to know you can always tell me things, and I love you, and all I want to do is like help you. So she's just like, right, yeah, let me read my book. But yeah, I mean, like it definitely made me think about them. It didn't make me care about Autumn, right? Like Autumn didn't seem like much of a character to me.
The way I read her character is this is a girl who has been in survival mode for a long time.
Yeah.
Her dad's an alcoholic. Her school is not a fun place to be.
No, all the boys in her school are like rapists in training, if not already rapists. Her boss is this horrible molester.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this pregnancy is just another level of survival mode that she then has to access. Totally. And so she's frozen. But there is, I think you're pointing to something that is, I don't know if it's a flaw with the film, but it is probably true about it. It's kind of on rails. Like it sort of has to be, it has to sort of progress through this story. And there's not a lot of room to kind of, for Skylar and Autumn to have a side conversation about something else. I mean, they have some cute moments eating Chinese food and that kind of stuff, but
yeah, I mean, it's not even about side conversation. I guess I just see like, it's funny, like by saying she's in survival mode, I think you actually are clarifying to me part of what I find unsatisfying about it. And it may be that this is really a flaw that I have as a viewer. If it is a movie about a character and character development, it is a survivalist movie. It's a movie about like a guy who's dropped in the wilderness with nothing but a pocket knife.
Yeah.
And then like you have to watch him, at the beginning, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's sort of this soft, like he's swatting at mosquitoes. He's hopeless. He's hungry. And then by the end, he's fucking Tom Hanks at the end of, Castaway. Yeah. With like the beach ball, and he's like ripped, and he's chewing fish and spiking them out of the sea, on the first try. I mean, I fucking hate that kind of movie. That kind of story is so boring to me. It's so boring. I read one of those books when I was a kid. It was called Hatchet by Gary Paulson. And when I read it, I thought like, all right, that's sort of satisfying in this way. But like, definitely never need to read that or see that story again because it's so boring. And I think like, yeah, maybe this was a survivalist movie, in which case it may have been a perfectly successful survivalist movie about a brutal system in which she's having to survive. And again, God bless her. And like, it's so well done. But like, I fucking hate that kind of story. It's so boring to me. I think it's an important reality. I don't think it's a boring like reality. I think like, again, I'm all for the the policies that the director is for. But like, A, she's clearly very much for them. Like it's clearly a rhetorical movie. And B, like that story sucks. I don't know. As a
Do
story.
you think do you think that this film could shift anybody's viewpoint?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
Mm.
I mean, I think like yeah, again, I think it's a pretty well done piece of propaganda. Like I think not I don't say that dismissively. Like I think yeah, like I could imagine particularly yeah, like I can imagine people seeing this and having like and coming away with a little bit of uneasiness about the question in a way that maybe they didn't have before. And like that sounds like like a significant accomplishment politically speaking. Yeah, totally. Tell me about
Um,
you, because I mean you've been asking me about my opinions on all this stuff, but I actually haven't heard anything from you. So talk to me.
what would you like to know?
Any of the things I've been most wrong about along the way.
Well, wrong about? I don't know. I mean, I don't really know that I could say that you're wrong about any part of it. I just don't share that same perspective of the moral view on this is not one that
Mm.
I can bring myself to see.
Tell me how you mean.
I've been thinking about it a lot since we sort of tabled this as like a
Yeah, yeah.
possible conversation, and I've been sort of turning over in my mind like, is it morally wrong to have an abortion? And my brain just sort of short circuits. I'm like, moral? I don't know. It's not really relevant. It doesn't feel like the best way I can think of to put it is it's not my business to make that judgment. And,
Sure, yeah. I,
yeah,
I,
this
I
is
agree
a,
with that. I think it's not my business either.
no, no, and,
But
but
like,
like,
but I don't think that necessarily changes the situation. Like, I don't think. Let me like clarify something. I don't think I'm a good person. I don't think I live a good life. Like, I
I
don't
don't
think.
think I'm a good
I
person
don't think.
either.
I don't. Yeah.
We're
Like, I don't. I
clearly
don't
in agreement about
see.
that.
I don't see this as like, oh, look at those people down there doing those bad things. I think like most of us spend most of our time doing, passively bad things, and often they are not. I mean, seldom are they malicious. Seldom are they calculated. Usually they are, uh, we're just pulling a release valve. We're just saying, like, oh, this is going to be and I think there are a lot of different ways to do that. And there are a lot of different scales on which to do that. And like sometimes it's like, I'm going to order this from Amazon. Like
Yeah, yeah.
let's go ahead and do to next day delivery because I just don't really want to wait. And like I don't mind if like the traffic gets a little more cramped. I don't mind if like another truck is on the road spewing shit into the atmosphere. Like I kind of need to just get that tomorrow. And like that's one level of this sort of impulse that we all have and that I certainly indulge very frequently. Like I'm not a good person, but I think seen like here's the thing, like with the abortion argument, in some ways it's a bizarre argument because one side is saying abortion is a legal right and the other side is saying abortion is a moral wrong. And like I don't know that I think that's an argument at cross purposes. And so like when I say I don't feel at all confident saying like it's definitely a-okay morally speaking. I think like I don't know. I'm not interested in going out and telling people what to do. I'm not interested in going out and telling people that they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. I don't feel confident making a judgment about it. But I also think like if we are going to address this question, we're actually addressing two questions, right? One is legal, one is moral. Like that's what the
Mm.
debate is. I think in Australia it's not a debate, but here it's a huge debate. It's a huge
Yes,
debate, and it's those two
yes,
debates. It's legal, moral. And so if you're going to talk about it and say like I think if you're going to talk about it honestly, you have to address both of those questions.
yeah.
But
Which is where I get
yeah,
stuck because
yeah,
I just don't feel, I don't have just can't bring myself to say anything about the morality of it. Like I'm not sandbagging. I just really can't. I just don't.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel that way about all moral hypotheticals?
Kind of.
Yeah. And it harm none, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Yeah, I think like harm is something I think about all the time,
I
but
mean,
morality is not.
sure. Like, does it ever occur to you that like we're fucking future generations because of how
You
we
know,
treat the planet?
every day,
Yeah. So what about
every
if one of
day.
those future generations is like very immediate future, right? Like to me, that's just a question of scale. In a way, like I don't know. I think like progressives are very comfortable talking about people who are going to be born 100 years from now. They're very uncomfortable about people who are going to be born 7 months from now.
Yeah, well, I think the line on them is that they're going to save us, right?
No, they're not going to save us. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't. I mean, the truth is like I don't. Well, all right. So like, you're not interested in quite moral questions in general. It seems like.
Well, no, I mean, it's not that I'm not interested in them. I find it very hard because I'm coming from a totally different background to you. I
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
raised with any sort of religion or
Yeah.
like a moral code or whatever, like my school motto was be sensible. That's about as far as it went. And I get
That's
to
pretty
live in
good.
a
Yeah.
country where, at least at the moment, these rights are very well protected.
Yeah.
And so I've always known that if I got pregnant, I've never wanted to have a baby, so I've always known that if I got pregnant, I would be able, and I've taken the morning after pill a couple of times,
Sure, sure.
um, that I would be okay.
Yeah.
So I
As you should
just,
be, right? Like as you
yeah,
should
so
be.
it hasn't come up, and in the way that I suppose it must come up if you are an American person who can get pregnant. Like
Yeah.
you would have to think about this on a moral level.
You wouldn't. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily because there are plenty of people here who have that kind of background. But I think if you are going to talk about I guess it's interesting because you're in sort of in bringing this up. I guess here it is a raging war,
Yeah.
and so when you say, "What do you think about it?" I can't just talk about one side of that war, right? I can agree with one side over the other, but I can't ignore the existence of the other side. And so,
Mm.
and the claims they make, some of which are, more persuasive than others. But I also think about like, I think there are plenty of questions that are like that we might grow up thinking of in totally amoral terms. And then our perspective shifts, right? Like I think even just the way we treat dogs in this country has changed radically from when I was a kid. Like really, really changed a lot, you know?
Mm.
I think like
Mm.
the way we think about animals in general has changed. Some of the treatment has not changed, but the way we think about them has changed. I went to see Shamu when I was a kid, you know? Do you know what Shamu is? The killer whale.
Oh,
It's
right.
a famous captive killer whale in Florida.
Oh, okay.
And then like everybody saw Blackfish. Like, holy shit, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
Um,
Couldn't watch Blackfish. Yeah.
yeah. Similarly, like on a very dumb level, on a very silly level. I mean, some people don't find it silly at all, but like circumcision, right? When I was growing up, it was, 100% the norm for any boy born in the hospital. Like the default was you get circumcised. And this was true, even though like like botched circumcisions were like common, like common. Like the day my sister was born, two boys in the same hospital had botched circumcisions, and like there's
God.
still like it still is like, oh, I guess yeah, go ahead and do it. So I think like that should not happen. Like there's no reason like botched circumcisions should not be happening at all. Like that like there's no like the technology has been around for a very long time. There's no reason for that to happen. But also like it was just a complete given. And now people are like the first time I heard somebody say like, oh, circumcision, it's really male circumcision is almost like female circumcision. And you're like, are you fucking kidding? This is what a joke. Like, what are you talking about? And I think the more I've heard about it, the more I've thought about it, I think like, probably there's not really a good argument for circumcising babies. Like the real, like probably babies should just as a default not be circumcised. And like not to even address questions of Jewish tradition at all or Muslim tradition at all, but like that's a question that like for me was just absolute background noise, like didn't even occur to me to be a thing that you would think about. And now I think like, well, I guess I do like I am thinking about it in moral terms. And I think like I don't have a son, but if I did, I don't think I would have him circumcised.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is just that thing of like when it becomes relevant to your life, maybe, or like you say, it's a war over there. This question is a war.
Yeah.
And God, like it's hard to overstate how much Australians worry about Americans. Like
Yeah.
we think about you, we read news about you, we talk about you all the time, which is maybe we can get a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
horror of this and get it talking about Hannah Gadsby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just like constantly, it's an obsession.
What is
It's a
the
national
tone of
obsession.
the obsession? Is it like
Oh,
the
they're bloody
troubled
crazy.
nephew?
Those
Yeah, they're crazy.
bloody
They're crazy.
insane. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing now.
Yeah, we are crazy.
But it doesn't stop
Yeah.
me from reading Americans, watching American film, listening to American music.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
the
you've heard the long. This is like side, just to throw another grenade into the conversation. Like the arguments about variation between sexes being a question of long tails.
long tails. Okay.
Long tails. That the argument is not that men are smarter than women or women are smarter than men. It's that, or even behaviorally better or worse, but that women on average clump in the middle of the bell curve, and men also clump in the middle, but have longer tails. They're more idiots and
Oh.
geniuses. They're more saints and psychopaths. They're more like and I feel like American culture, at least, it seems like there's some of us you adore, and then we also supply plenty of people for you to despise.
And distract ourselves from our own problems
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
by just obsessing. Yeah, I want to try to bring in this article that was on Slate a couple of months ago
yeah, yeah, yeah.
about Hannah Gadsby's show at the Brooklyn Museum, Brooklyn Art Gallery, something,
Mm-hmm.
called "It's Problematic."
Oh my
Terrible
god.
title, which
Oh my
is
god.
about
Jesus.
it's about Picasso,
Yeah.
and Hannah Gadsby got just a huge amount of flack for
Wait,
it.
tell
Apparently,
people what it was though. Like what it was
it,
what was the thing?
the thing, as I understand it, and I really wish I could see the show,
Yeah.
is that Hannah Gadsby was bringing into this gallery some Picassos, but then also some work by women,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to sort of create a conversation between the work that was commenting on essentially Picasso's misogyny and use of women as,
And with
questionable.
explicit also like her like little blurby comments next to the pieces that would say sometimes like a little one word snarky remark about a
Yeah, yeah. Which
Picasso
it sounds
painting
like
or
if there
something
was a
like that.
sin, it was the fact that these were not very funny,
Yeah,
which for a comedian is really a sin.
I
But
mean, you wonder if the name of the show didn't tip them off.
I know,
It's one of the worst titles I've ever heard.
yeah. But I think more interesting that like I don't want to sit here and heap shit on Hannah Gadsby.
Sure, sure,
Like
sure. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just
yeah.
not. Let's just not. But what this article written by this guy Patrick Marlborough from Perth, Patrick from
Hmm.
Perth,
Perth
is
stereotypes?
really
Anything? What do we think of someone from Perth? What does that tell us?
well. Being from Perth, like being from Canberra, like you're from a isolated cultural wasteland, but you just happen to be way out west.
Oh, okay.
Like yeah,
Canberra is like
it's
central from a like it's the center of government, but it's culturally nowhere.
culturally nowhere.
And Perth
Perth,
is nowhere and nowhere.
nowhere. It's the most isolated capital in the world,
Okay.
geographically. So Patrick got out of Perth and he got to Bushwick and he was hanging out there and he has, it seems like, worked his way up to getting an article on Slate, which is a huge deal.
Yeah. Good for
Although
him.
Slate has gone dramatically downhill over the last couple of years and is now unbearable to read, as is The
Yeah.
Atlantic. But he says a bunch of really interesting stuff about Americans and Australians. I'm just going to read a little bit. So he says, I don't believe Americans will ever be able to fully understand Australians, Australian culture, Australian attitudes, or Australian thought. And why would they? Americans are American, which means they aren't obliged to understand anyone, even themselves. That's the beauty of their version of freedom, after all. Aussies, meanwhile, are up to our bottom lip in American culture, philosophy, politics, and let's call it what it is, psychosis, from day dot to the point where we're both drowning in and drowned out by it. Yeah, which is pretty much sums up my experience of culture. And yeah, and the last thing I just want to pull out is this line, Americans are sincere to a fault, whereas Australians are insincere to a fault. And this is kind of what I was trying to say to you very early on when we started talking, was I was trying to make the case to you that American poetry has this strain of sincerity that I find so like amusing. I find it so funny. Just like, God, and listeners write to me because I've had a couple, I've had Elijah on and a couple of other Americans recently, and the overwhelming feedback I get is, God, they take themselves so bloody seriously, don't they?
Yeah, probably so.
But I also love that. I also find that
Yeah.
really charming.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I mean, I think in a sense though, there is a luxury in not having to take yourself seriously.
Oh, it is very luxurious. It is very, and that's the point that this article kind of makes. Patrick is, I'm going to call him Patrick in Perth, is trying to unpack this particularly Australian phrase, yeah, nah,
Yeah.
which is a dismissal. It's kind of like, I see where you're coming from, but I don't agree with you.
Right.
And there is something so lazy, I guess, luxuriously lazy in just taking a whole category of something and going, yeah, nah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind it. I mean, I don't mind that as a response, saying it's probably good to be able to say, I do understand what you're saying, and it's not for me, but also like no harm, no foul. Like we don't need to fight about it. Which seems to be also like the unstated follow up to that statement is like, we don't need to, it doesn't need to be a big thing.
Doesn't need to be a big deal. And I think that's what my listeners mean when they say, oh, they take themselves very seriously, is like, yeah, we don't really want to fight most of the time, whereas it seems like Americans, maybe in general, on the whole, really quite like a bit of argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you do.
Of course. Yeah. Why not?
Of course. What do you mean, of course?
Well, I mean,
Don't you feel bruised? Don't you feel like...
yeah, always. But I always feel bruised. I feel bruised anyway, right? Even if I don't, even if I wake up and I'm not like even talking to nobody, I feel bruised. Like that's a given, right?
So this is like you decided where and how you were going to be bruised?
Well, I guess like not being bruised isn't my motive. Like, that's not motivation, right? Motivation is like, well, this is going to be interesting.
Whereas I'm like, oh God, this is going to be terrible. This is going to detonate our friendship, or this is going to, lead to something.
Yeah,
Why don't we just leave it?
All right, that was the first part of my conversation with Alice about abortion, men, women, sex, power, Australia, fame, and so on. I hope you enjoyed it. I do. The second part, which is a good deal longer, is I think a lot juicier as well. And I do hope you will check it out at SLEERICKETS@substack.com. I've mostly finished editing it, so I should have that up in the next couple days. Thanks very much for listening. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.